Kamisha Davis, along with Mr. Andre Stevens. And today we're discussing faith-based community development. Mr. Stevens, what is faith-based community development?
Faith-based community development is when the scriptures meet the community. It's the opportunity for the morals, the values, and all of the spiritual development that occurs inside the various houses of worship actually move beyond those walls and into the streets. It is the common thread that speaks to all traditions of faith, and that is to help uplift humanity. And so faith-based community development is a way of expressing the church, the mosque, the synagogue, the temple. Is a way for them to express through action and live out their faith.
Okay. What are some of the projects that faith-based groups have done in partnership with the government?
Faith-based development, it's not highly recognized, but it's been around for a very long time. 97%. Well, let me just say this: Lutheran Services in America, which annually receives more than 1/3 of its $7 billion budget from government funding. And this is an old statistic, but it bears highlighting. In 1997, they served some 65,000 elderly that are in nursing homes and independent living facilities. In many places, you'll hear of churches, the Methodist hospital, or you will hear about a Catholic hospital or Baptist hospital. Those are faith-based initiatives. Those are actions that manifested from a church or a faith mission, and it moved out into the community in the forms of healthcare services or housing for the elderly. You also, I'm sure, have heard about Habitat for Humanity International, which provides safe and affordable housing for some 100,000 homes for the poor, and they've worked very closely with the government. And then you have various Jewish agencies and Catholic charities all over the country that own or have participated in what's called Section 202 housing, and again, that's housing for the elderly. And there's a variety of things. There's HIV, AIDS clinics. There's shelters for abused women. There's foster orphanages and different things like that. There's also credit unions and other things like that that are based on community development. They're called community development credit unions, and they're across the country as well. So there's a wide array of services and activities that faith-based groups historically have been involved with that work toward serving humanity.
All right, so there is a connection between faith-based organizations and the community that can continue on without violating anything between church or the separation between church and state.
Right. The mechanism that I've experienced is, again, a community development corporation, which is a separate organization, corporation, state registered, and then it gets a federal tax ID, a federal designation as a 501c3 organization. It has a separate board of directors, so it is not the trustees from the church that necessarily all together move over to run the nonprofit. No, the nonprofit will have maybe members that are not even a part of the church. They just may be folks who are outside of that particular denomination or that particular house of worship, living in the community, but who want to participate in the particular initiative. So it isn't necessarily the church that's running it per se. There are members of the church who sit on the governing board of the nonprofit or the community development corporation, which actually engages in the actions that are necessary to serve the community.
Okay. It appears that the church involvement amongst millennials is dwindling. How can faith-based community development sustain itself without the vital young adult participation?
One of the things that I believe that's causing the disconnect between the young millennials and the church or house of worship across the country is the millennials, I believe, are action oriented. In other words, they grew up in an environment where change occurred very quickly, quicker than at any time of our existence. You think about it, your cell phone is obsolete in a couple of years, When I was growing up, we had a rotary phone for, 10, 15 years, and then came the punch touch phone, and we've had that hanging on the wall for many, many years, and then maybe 20 years later, here comes the flip cell phone, but those things are now changing so much more rapidly. There's, in a space of 18 months to 2 years, you're upgrading your phone, and so the millennials are not as patient, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that it's the environment in which they grew up in, and so change occurs slowly. And that's sometimes hard for young people to understand. And when I was, young or younger, it was also hard for me to embrace the notion that change did not occur rapidly or quicker. But change is a process that does take time, and sometimes it may take decades. It may take many decades sometimes before you actually see the full manifestation of a change initiative. So the thing that I like to think is that if a house of worship, faith-based community church got involved in something that millennials could see, if they could see areas that were struggling with poverty begin to change, or if they saw people who had children just running throughout the community unattended or without activities that would strengthen them and would illuminate their minds. If millennials had an apparatus that they could work with that was connected to the church or the temple or house of worship, then that would be more fulfilling to them, and it would also satisfy their need to see change occurring in some sense immediately, because they would be engaged in the activity. And at the same time, it would give them an opportunity to exercise their faith. It's one thing to go and preach sermon or a session of teaching. There's a whole nother level of learning when you are able to take those lessons and you're actually applying them in the community or being challenged on the very things that you've learned. It makes you a stronger faith believer.
So in some senses, community development could actually bring those millennials back to the church.
Absolutely. I think that's what millennials in my mind are really screaming for. They do not want church the way we had church or the way I had church, because you're a millennial. But they don't want to be talked at for 2 hours or they don't like spending hours upon hours in a church service. And their networks, my children, I think the least amount of Facebook friends any of my children might have would be maybe 2,500. They all exceed 2,500 friends on Facebook. So not that they are actually friends, but just the fact that that's a network, that's a potential person that they could reach out and touch or say hi or whatever. That's pretty impactful when you think about that.
Right.
That millennials can reach out and touch on their own domain or their own little world. They've got 2,500 people who they can reach out and speak to. Right. Well, we never had that opportunity. So that whole environment, from social media to digitalization of our economy and our country and our world, it has absolutely changed everything, including the church. And so I guess I say all that to say is that they're getting influenced by many, many different voices. And so in order to capture a millennial or young adult to engage in faith-based activities, you've got to have some things that's going to capture them, because they're getting a lot of voices, a lot of voices.
All right, can you give us any other tips on how to connect faith-based organizations and community development?
I think the key is having a leader who is energetic, visionary, bold, and courageous. And all of those are characteristics that are highlighted and esteemed in my tradition, which is Christianity and the Bible. David had to be courageous. Joseph had to be a visionary. Nehemiah, he had to be a wall builder, a man of action. Jesus Christ himself, was a man on the go. He was an outreach kind of a guy, and not afraid to go into dark places. And those are the things what young people are say, keep it 100, Well, you start doing those kinds of things, in their mind, that's keeping what you're preaching, you're keeping it 100, because you're actually living out the scriptures. And so, again, a young person or a millennial, while you're preaching a sermon to them, they could Google it, they can get 500 commentaries on that theme sermon, they could go through the concordance, they have a wide variety of resources while you're preaching to test your message and the validity of your message. So that's one thing. But the other thing is the validity of your message outside those four walls. How valid is your message once you leave those four walls? And a leader has to be able to show the validity of their message, not that they're preaching at people, because the millennials, they're not going to hear that.
Right.
But the validity of who you say you are, keeping it 100, proves itself when you step outside those four walls. And what are you going to do for my son who's been unemployed for 10 years? Or what are you going to do for my daughter who's having problems or issues with drugs? What kind of comforts are you going to provide for her? What efforts are you exercising to help her? My grandmother is inadequately housed. What are the things that you're doing to help bring about housing? And this whole notion that there's this wide valley between government and the faith community is ridiculous. Because on one hand, you're asking members to pay tithes into your church, but you don't recognize that those are the very same members who pay taxes to your government. So you have the opportunity to ask that your tax dollars be used in your community. So what better way to facilitate that transaction than to have an institution that's connected in some way to the community of faith, but actually taking advantage of both the tithe and the tax.
So in general, faith-based organizations and community development can work together to continue to build bridges to a stronger future for any community. This is Kamisha Davis along with Mr. Andre Stevens speaking on faith-based community development.
Thank you.